Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to the first Scorchio day of the year, by which I mean probably high 20s, mid to high 20s. Or I've just nipped out in front of a queue of traffic, which is great because I've got this rule that traffic is better off behind me than in front, the same way as my other rule, which is that money is better off in my bank account than somebody else's. So that's just a little tip, by the way. Turn this off, get rid of that spring, because I know all these things annoy you. Third gear through the 30. Yeah, if a patient, Kevin Lewis gave me this tip, which was that, you do all the sales and everything, and then you don't ask for the actual sale, you don't ask for the money. People go away and say, yeah, well, he told me all about this whitening and what a good thing it was, and then we just sort of looked at each other and I said, is that it? And he said, yeah, and so I left. Whereas what you should do is you should say, so should I get you booked in for the whitening then? Let them say no. The reason why we don't do it is because we're frightened of rejection. We're frightened of people saying to us, well, you didn't make that sound very good, actually, I don't really fancy that, or you've misunderstood what I was after, and that's not at all what I'm looking for, or just I've thought about it and I've decided no, for various reasons, my own reasons. I haven't got the money, it's too expensive, you don't want them to, and that's the point at which your embarrassment might occur. So you have to be totally happy with people turning down treatment. And I am myself, I'm totally happy with people turning down my treatment. And that dovetails into another little tip, which is that you should always suggest all the treatment at the first visit. Now, what that means is that someone who comes in for, because they've lost a cusp on a tooth, might end up with a quote for 4 crowns and a new denture. So in the email that day, they'll get a quote for about £4,000 or something. But you acquire liberty to make it clear to the patient. Say, look, I'm going to add on everything. Everything you need doing, I'm going to put down, because it's very difficult for you later then to come back and say, oh, by the way, did you know you need a crown on that? And the patient will then quite rightly say, well, you didn't mention that last time I came in, and the tooth hasn't changed at all. So what's the difference between then and now? And they may well come to the conclusion that the difference between then and now is that you're a bit strapped for cash, and you wouldn't mind having a few £100 off them to do a crown that you've suddenly decided needs doing, which you did not decide needed doing last time they came in. So always put everything down and say to the patients that some of this I recommend is done sooner rather than later. Some of it might be all right for a while, Some of it you might not even care about. I personally had 4 broken teeth, 4 bits of enamel snapped off my molars before I went to see the dentist, and I had to get it all sorted out, including a crown and fillings and all sorts of stuff. But that's because I knew that there was no decay there. It was just natural wear and tear. I was just on one of the old heavy metal brigade, and so you get bits fall off you from time to time. Well, as soon as I get around these bends, I'll try and clean the windscreen a bit for you. Should be better. On these dry days, you find that all right. You find that the screen gets covered in dust, Anyway, so, and a classic example of that is a tooth, isn't it? That's cracked. Say you've got a patient who comes in and they've got symptomatic tooth, and typically they'll say it hurts when they bite on it, especially if they bite something like reasonably hard on it, like soda bread or something. And you say, like, those symptoms are typical of a tooth with a crack in it. And then there are two types of cracks. I explain this to the patient. Those that run sideways, in which case lumps of teeth fall off. And what happens with those is the patient will say, this tooth was really painful to bite on until last week I bit on something and a lump fell off, but now it's all right. Unless it's broken through the nerve. But these stress fractures very rarely go through the nerve. The sort of cracks that go through the nerves are trauma fractures. The other type of crack is a vertical fracture. I had one of those myself on my upper left 6. And those are far more serious, because if they're allowed to progress, then they will eventually split the tooth in half. And although you might like to think that a tooth can sit there in the gum in two halves perfectly fine, it doesn't. It never does. The nerve always dies. And in my case, I had my root treated, and it still didn't work, fix the problem. And so eventually, I had to have it taken out and had a bridge put in. So you've got this patient in who's got like all the symptoms of a fracture, and they say, well, so what do you say? Well, we'll take an x-ray. Now, what you're looking for on the x-ray is some evidence of periapical bone loss, which means that the tooth is non-vital and, it needs root filling. You're also looking for the type, the depth of the filling, the how close the filling is to the pulp chamber, etc. And in the very, very unlikely event that you might see the fracture. Now, the reason why you won't see the fracture is because if it runs entirely in the same plane as the x-ray, then it might show up. And the only ones that really show up are upper incisors, where the patient's been bashed in the mouth, and then they tend to break across. And so you can see the break, you can see the two halves of the tooth. But with a lower molar, for example, you're almost certainly never going to be able to see the fracture. But of course, it's the first question that the patient asks. Well, you've taken an x-ray, can you see the crack? And what they're saying is, not only are they saying, can you see the crack? In other words, is it as bad as you've told me it might be? They're also saying, can you back up for, what your BS you've been telling me about this tooth possibly being fractured? Because you don't really know what... you can't see anything wrong with it. And so have you got any more evidence to sort of give me that is the correct diagnosis? And of course, you then have to turn around and say, no, I can't see the crack, which makes you look like an idiot. So it's important to say to them, before you take the x-ray, it's almost impossible to see the crack on this type of x-ray. So please don't expect us to see it. If we see it, it's a fluke. If we can't, then, then that's quite normal, quite expected. We're not looking for that, we're looking for periapical bone loss. So then you can do vitality testing, which in the early days was to do with ethyl chloride on cotton wool, and some people do it with hot GP, but now it's all done with electronic pulp testers that have got batteries in. So you can EPT the tooth as well, but the trouble with the crack is that the symptoms are very, they are almost always diagnosed from the symptoms and not the signs. You would like, wouldn't you, ideally, to have a sort of an exaggerated reading on the EPT, meaning that the pulp is dead. And some, you might get that, but it's far more likely that you'll get some sort of nebulous reading. Like if say 13 is definitely vital and 64 is definitely dead, you'll get something like a 37. Which a 37, book is still vital, but it's not like healthy, is it? But then you could argue that, if the patient's old, the pulse chamber's probably shrunk, the dentine tubules are all sclerosed and they're all occluded. Excuse me. And therefore, you wouldn't expect a reading of 13. But another reason for that nebulous, indeterminate reading may be that I'm going to concentrate a second. Excuse me. Maybe that it's a 3-rooted tooth and only one of the roots is. Let's get out of the way of a large aggregate lorry. So you could have one vital nerve and 2 non-vital, or 1 non-vital and 2 vital, or whatever, any combination. So then, really, disregarding for a minute the option of doing nothing, which we're always supposed to suggest, which I've never understood why I have to put in my notes that we discuss the option of doing nothing when the patients come in with a problem and you're discussing what to do about the problem and completely ignoring it. It's one option, I think the only benefit really of, if you suggest doing nothing to a patient who's come in with a problem, they're going to look at you like you're a complete lunatic. It's like going to a doctor with a gangrenous toe and the doctor saying, well, we could just sort of, put a sock over it. So the main advantage of discussing no treatment is to impress upon the patient, not scare them, but just impress upon them the folly of ignoring the problem in terms of, the problems with dentistry always get worse. I've never known a dental problem that actually got better by leaving it. There are a few, well, I suppose, that, but they're mostly post-treatment problems, not pre-treatment problems. Oh, let's go a different way today, shall we? So your best bet, when discussing what will happen, if you say to someone, well, you've got some decay in that tooth, suppose they come in to have whitening. Now, you could argue that you should insist that they have, and let's say you do bite wings ahead of the whitening, and you find they've got 2 decayed teeth. And you say, well, look, you've got 2 decayed teeth. Now, in what order do you do that treatment? Do you insist on getting the decay done first? And by making up some completely bogus reason, like the whitening trays won't fit because when we fill the teeth might change shape slightly, so we have to do the fillings first before the whitening? Or do you get on and do the whitening because that reason is not really valid, because the whitening trays will fit even after the fillings? They're not that accurate. So, or do you just get on with doing the whitening tray and then tell the patient to come back and get the fillings done? Now, I always say to the patient, you've got 2, we have discovered routinely on x-rays, 2 fillings that need whitening. Filling. 2 teeth that need filling. And please come back and get them fixed at your convenience. because they are not going to get any bigger, smaller. They're only going to get worse. And I'm quite honest with them. I say that we have a lot of patients where we discover stuff routinely and they just don't bother, because they're coming for whitening, they've got their whitening, and it's the old problem, isn't it? If it's not hurting, then although they are, I do offer tangibility insofar as that, if it's discovered on x-rays, I show them on x-ray, I show them the x-ray. And it doesn't take a lot to educate a patient to the point where they can diagnose caries on a bite wing. It's only like you say that black bit there. It's that it's decay in the tooth, and you can compare it to the tooth next door. Typical. See, those lights have turned red, and there's nobody here. There's absolutely nobody here. These lights are just totally pointless in the way that they operate. So we're going around in a big circle here, but we are going to end up where we left. So you say to the patient, look, this is what you need. This is what I recommend to bring your mouth up to a reasonable standard. And with our patient with a cracked tooth, you might say to them, well, I can shorten the cusp, which we think is cracked. I can take the filling out, and sometimes we can see the crack, sometimes we can't, but usually we can. Then we can refill it and shorten the cusp. And but ultimately you're going to need to have a crown done on that. And perhaps taking the filling out and shortening the cusps is as far as the patient's prepared to go. They can find a couple of £100 for that, but they can't find the £700 it will take them to have a ceramic crown done over the top, on as well as the £200 for diagnosing and drilling out the crack. One incidental thing is that when you're looking for cracked teeth, you expect them to be really, really heavily filled teeth. With chunks breaking off. But I'd say half the time they're not. Half the time there might be an occlusal, just an occlusal, and you might say, well, how on earth has a tooth with nothing but an occlusal in it managed to crack itself in half? And honestly, I don't know. I really don't have an answer to that question. I think, if you look at them, they seem to have marginal deficiencies. But when you get underneath, I did one the other day, and it was the lower 6, I think. And the mesiolingual cusp was the one that was in the process of fracturing. And we saw the fracture coming up the front of the tooth, running inside the cusp and running out the buccal, out the lingual. Is that the buccal? Must be the mesiobuccal cusp. Anyway, that's not relevant. But also there were signs of some sort of vertical crack coming up the distal. And you're like, well, how the hell's the distal managed to get a crack? Oh, there's a naughty boy. DV72KAK. Mr. Movano, yeah. So they're like we get occult caries, we also get occult cracking. But the patient then will always come back to that, well, how soon do I need to get the crown done? And there is no answer to that question. You just have to say to them, look, the best time to get the crown done is the day before the tooth breaks in half. You can tell me what day the tooth's going to break in half, and I'll tell you what day to get the crown done. But then the next question is, well, when is the tooth likely to break in half? And the answer is, it could be 10 years from now, or it could be tomorrow morning. There's no way of knowing. But what we've done our best to try and drill stop the crack and put a composite in it, which is bonded in, so therefore to a certain extent will tend to hold the sides of the tooth together, or at least that's the story anyway, which will provide some temporary relief, but ultimately it needs a crown sitting on the top of it like a crash helmet to strengthen it and prolong the life of the tooth. And that's the treatment that the patient then won't come back and get done. They'll take a chance. And to be honest with you, I don't care, because it's their chance to take. But I don't care. I think when we did a survey of uncompleted courses of treatment, we found that probably, well, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was lower than we expected, let's put it this way. When out of all the treatment plans we do, I would say probably at least 33% of the work is not completed. And that's because of our tendency to put onto the treatment plan everything. Because we don't want the patient coming back and saying, why are you telling me I need X, Y, and Z? All of a sudden, If you can say, actually, if you look, it was on the very first quote I gave you, then that helps you tremendously. Eyes straight. Yeah. There's a chance of you knocking your teeth out if you keep your hands on the handlebars. Right, anyway, I hope that was helpful. I don't even know how we started on this, and I certainly, when I started, I didn't have any subjects in mind at all. So, just anyway, I'm gonna have a lovely sunny day. Hope you do too. Talk to you soon. Bye.